Hello everyone, my name is Purnalal Daulagajau. You can call me in short Purna sir, okay? I'll be taking your botany chapter, botany part. So first of all, before going to discuss our chapter, I would like to welcome to all first year students, and I'll be taking your botany part. So before going to the chapter, you should know that in biology, it is divided into two groups, okay? Botany and zoology. All the plant parts are included in botany and all the animal parts are included in zoology. Alright, so zoology will be taken by other teachers. I'll take your botany part. Okay, so let's start our first chapter. The first unit we have. First chapter, the living world we have. So living world, it's all about the living things. We need to know is about the characteristic of living organism, and we will see some rules provided by different organization to write a scientific name, to write any scientific name. All right. So our first unit, first chapter we have in our first year. The first chapter we have is the living world. The living world. This is our first chapter. Okay, so I want you to know before going to this chapter that some basic things when you study biology, you have taken science for some reason, I guess. So you should know before going to the living world. Biology, when we talk about biology, first we need to know is about the meaning of biology. What does that mean, biology? See, in biology, every name, it is written in Latin language, okay? Not in English language, it is written in Latin language. The reason why it is written in Latin language, we will see that later. So biology is a Latin word. It has two meanings, bio and logi. Bio means life. Bio means life. And the logi means study. Bio means life and logi means study. Okay? So this is the meaning of biology. So who is the father of biology? Next thing that you need to know, the father of biology. Now this type of question they never ask in exam, but you need to know. Since you have taken science, you need to know all those terms, because if somewhere some people ask you who is the father of biology, what is the meaning of biology, that you should know all those things, okay? Because you have taken science. So father of biology, who is the father of biology? Aristotle. Aristotle is known as the father of biology, and Aristotle is also known as the father of zoology. Okay, Aristotle is the father of biology as well as father of zoology. It is also known as father of zoology. Remember, father of zoology and father of biology are known as Aristotle. Next thing you need to know is the father of botany, that is our plants part. Father of botany. Father of botany are known as Theophrastus. The name of the scientist, Theophrastus, are known as father of botany. So these are the basic things that you need to know before going to the chapter. Okay, so remember, now what I want in you is you need to be very sincere. I want sincerity in you. I want the discipline, and please follow our instruction. We will guide everything that you need. Just have faith on us and follow our instruction. Okay, we will go slowly and steadily, one by one. So you have entered into your new phase of your life, so you will know everything. So have patience and be sincere, be honest to yourself. All right. So we will discuss one by one each chapter. So the first chapter we have the living world, is the basic things we need to know is about the living organism. We need to know the characteristic of living organism. So there are some rules put forward by organization. When we write any scientific name of the living organism, we need to know, we need to remember some scientist name, we need to remember some rules put forward by some scientists. Alright. Okay, so remember, what is biology? Biology means the study of life. Bio means life, logy means study. So this is a Latin language, okay? The biology words are written in Latin language because Latin language are considered as dead language. That it is no longer in use now. So we will see why later. Okay, so and the father of biology are known as Aristotle, as well as he is also a father of zoology. Remember, sometimes maybe question asks. Okay, the father of botany are known as Theophrastus. Remember. Spelling, see, remember, whenever you write a scientist name, always be careful with the spelling. And I want you to follow NCERT book only, no other books, okay? Follow NCERT books only. All my topic and discussions are based on NCERT book. And all the question comes from NCERT book only. So, just follow NCERT book until and unless you complete NCERT book, do not take any other book. Okay. So we will discuss now our first unit, first chapter, the living role. Alright, so tell me, when we recall any organism as a living organism, when we call any organism as a living organism, you know, okay, they must show some special characteristic. By seeing that characteristic, we can say that that organism is a living organism, and that organism is non-living organism, right? So we need to discuss some characteristic of living organism. So first topic of this chapter is characteristic of living organism. Characteristic of living organism. And please take your copy, separate copy for botany and separate copy for zoology. So take your copy and pen, note it down, okay, one by one. I will give you everything in here. So because of this COVID-19 situation, pandemic situation, we have to go like that way only for some month maybe. We can just pray that this pandemic gets over very soon. Okay, so until and unless this pandemic gets over, we will continue online classes only. So I want you to take your note and pen, sit on your table, and then note it down one by one. So characteristic of living organism, there are many characteristics of living organism we can write, but I will show some important characteristic only, and we will discuss based on that. So tell me, when we say any organism is a living organism, only when those organisms show some special characteristic. Special characteristics like, number one characteristic we can take, growth. First characteristic we can take growth. Okay, I can give you 10, 20, 50, 100 characteristic of living organism, but I will give you some specific and important that it is required for your exam only. You already know, right? What is the characteristic of living organism? So first characteristic, growth. See, any organism must show growth. Okay, we grow, right? After birth, our body develops, our cell grows from the normal cell, and our body develops gradually. We grows, animal grows, plant grows, right? But we need to remember, if growth is actually exclusive characteristic of living organism or not, if there is any exception or not, we need to see that. Though we have said the growth is the characteristic of living organism, right? You know, but if there is any exception or not, we need to see that. Is there any exception? Does only living organisms show growth, or non-living organism also show growth? Is there any non-living organisms show growth in their body? Yes. For example, mountain. Mountain grows. but their growth is not from inside. While in our case, in human, animals or plant body, the growth is from their inside. Internal growth takes place. The cell develops. They produce a cell into many cells, okay? Then grows, the body grows. But in case of mountains, the growth is due to accumulation of other substances outside their body, okay? Accumulation of other substances like grass, maybe trees, a small plant grows outside the body of mountain, right? As a result, the mountain grows. Okay, the mountain grows. So in such growth, we call that growth as extrinsic growth. So mountain shows extrinsic growth. See, remember, whenever we use the word X, it means outside. If there is a word in, remember, it means inside. Something inside, X means outside. Remember. So growth is a characteristic of living organism, but it has some exception. Where? In mountain. We find growth in mountain, but their growth is due to accumulation of other substances like grasses, trees, maybe plants, small plants. So the mountain grows from outside their body, while in case of animals, human or plant body, the growth is from inside their body. So we say growth is not a defining properties of living organism. It's not a defining properties of living organism. The question asks which characters of living organism is not a defining properties of living organism. Which characters? Growth. Why? Because mountains also show growth, and their growth is known as extrinsic growth. While in case of our growth, the growth is known as intrinsic growth. Okay, intrinsic growth. So try to clear your concept. See, biology, most of you might think that biology is a memorizing chapter. I can just read it out, I can memorize it, and I can get a good percentage. That is not true. It's not going to help you. See, if you can memorize it, if you have good memory power, even if you can memorize, even if you get good marks, later on it is not going to help you in your future. Never. One day you will forget. I can guarantee it. But if you clear your concept, once, even if you forget, if you see once, everything will come into your mind. So try to clear your concept. Don't memorize it. Yes, memorizing is there. Memorizing part are there, like scientist name, scientific name that you need to memorize. But overall, it is a conceptual. Biology is a very interesting and very conceptual subject. So please be sincere. So first character is growth. Though growth is a characteristic of living organism, but they show exception. Remember, in biology, we always find exception. Okay, biology is a subject of exception. So in case of mountain, we find growth also. So that's why it is not actual characteristic of living organism, because mountain also show growth. While in that growth is, we call it as an extrinsic growth. The growth takes place outside their body. So that's why we do not call it as a defining properties of living organism. So that's why it is not a defining properties of living organism. Remember, the next characteristic we can take, reproduction. You all know all living organisms reproduce, right? All living organisms reproduce their offspring. Human reproduce, animals reproduce, plants reproduce. So all living organisms, they reproduce, right? But mountain, rocks, they never reproduce. They cannot reproduce. But still, if is there any exception, though we consider reproduction as a living character? Yes, it is a living characteristic. Yes, no doubt. Growth is also a living characteristic, but it has exception. But reproduction is also a living characteristic. But is there any exception or not? Is there any exception? Yes, we find exception in reproduction also, though we conclude reproduction in case of living organism characters, but there is an exception. Example, sterile couple. You might have seen in some places or in your environment, in your surrounding neighbor also, some married couple, they cannot reproduce their offspring. You might have seen somewhere, right? Some couples, married couple, they cannot reproduce. So, do we include that couples under non-living? No, of course they are living, but they cannot reproduce. There is an exception because of due to some defect maybe in their body, due to some defective structure maybe inside their reproductive structure, because the gamete formation maybe do not take place. So due to some reason they cannot reproduce their offspring. You might have seen, right? So we call that couple as sterile. Sterile, the word sterile means any organism which cannot reproduce. Okay, that is known as sterile. So in a couple married couple, if they cannot reproduce their offspring, we call it as a sterile couple. So there is an exception. So we have said that reproduction is a characteristic of living organism, but in case of sterile couple, they cannot reproduce. So there is an exception. One more example we can take. Mule. Have you seen mule? Try to see this picture in your internet. Mule is kind of animals. It is a hybrid of donkey and horse. Hybrid of male horse and female donkey. The animals look like some kind of goat, or it looks like goat or donkey kind of thing. So try to see this picture. Mule. We said that animal as mule. Mule is a sterile animal. They cannot reproduce. They cannot reproduce. So there is an exception that we find in case of reproduction. Though we have said that reproduction is a characteristic of living organism, but still we find an exception. Exceptions are sterile couple and a mule. Mule is an animals hybrid of male horse and female donkey. Mule. The animal is not a mule. Sterile. The word sterile means any organism which cannot reproduce. Okay. So there is an exception we find in reproduction. So that's why we cannot call it as a defining properties of living organism. The word defining means there is no any exception. Okay, but we find exception, so we will not call it as a defining property. So we will include under it is not a defining FINI. It is not a defining properties of living organism. It is not a defining properties of living organism. Which two characters is not a defining properties of living organism? The growth and reproduction. Remember, question asks, which characters is not a defining properties of living organism? Or mention two characters which is not a defining properties of living organism. So growth and reproduction. Why? Because in growth, the mountain also show growth, but in their growth is extrinsic growth. And in case of reproduction, the sterile couple, they cannot reproduce, and a mule, they cannot reproduce. So there is an exception, right? But they are the characteristic of living organism only. But there is an exception that we find. That exception that we need to remember exception. That's why we do not include these two characters under defining properties. Defining property means there is no any exception. They are the exact characteristics of appropriate characteristic of living organism. Okay. So now we'll take some few more characters like response to stimuli, or we can also call it as a consciousness. Okay, so we were discussing response to stimuli or consciousness. So you all know that all living organisms shows consciousness. They are aware of surrounding environment. Non-living organisms do not have such characteristics. They are unable to show any consciousness. For example, so suppose if you are in a jungle, if you are roaming in a jungle, suddenly you saw a tiger, a big giant tiger. So how will you react? What will you react? Of course, you will sense a danger, right? You will run away right away. So that is the consciousness that we have in our tissue, we have in our body. But in non-living organism, they do not have such consciousness. Okay, so rocks, mountains, they are in one particular place only. They do not have any consciousness. So only living organisms shows consciousness, non-living organisms do not show consciousness, and there is no any exception. So this is a defining properties of living organism, because we do not find any exception in case of consciousness. So this is a defining properties of living organism. Okay, so remember which is not a defining and which is a defining properties of living organism. Defining means exact appropriate characters, there is no any exception. So next we can take metabolism. There are many characters, but I will give you some important characters only. Metabolism. Metabolism means breakdown of organic substances into simpler ones inside the body. Okay, the reaction that takes place inside the body is known as metabolism. Simple words, metabolism means breakdown. When we eat food, when we ingest food inside our body, food, rice, for example, contain carbohydrate, right? So carbohydrate needs to get broken down into simpler ones. So there is a reaction that takes place inside our body. We have various enzymes inside our body, as well as for animals also, as well as for plants also. They have their enzyme which breaks down the complex organic substances into the simplest one. So such type of characters are shown by living organism only. Non-living organism do not have such type of characteristic. Remember, okay, metabolism means in simple word breakdown. Okay, what breakdown? The breakdown of organic substances into the simplest one inside the body. Okay, so this is the defining properties of living organism. There is no any such exception we find in metabolism. Okay, so metabolism means breakdown of organic substances into the simplest one. All right, now I can give you one more. So I'll give you 5 characters only. Enough. So if the question will only ask based on this, which characteristic is not a defining properties of living organism. So you need to remember these 2 characters, so growth and reproduction. Why, you already know now. So one more I'll give you, cellular organization. Cellular organization means from simple cell it develops into a larger cell. Okay, the first cell will form, then cell will give rise to tissue will give rise to tissue system will give rise into organs, organ will give rise to organ system, and organ system ultimately it results in the development of organism. So cell, that all process together we call it as a cellular organism. First, what happen in any living organism, the first cell will produce, okay, cell will develop, then the cell will give rise into a tissue. Cell will give rise into a tissue. In simple sense, I'm trying to explain it to you. Later we will discuss everything in details. Okay, so first what happen in any living organism, the cell will produce, then the cell will give rise to tissue will give rise into tissue system, and tissue system will give rise into organ will give rise into organ system, let me write it here. Then organ system will finally give rise to a living organism, any living organism. Okay, so this all overall process are called it as a cellular organization, and we find cellular organization in case of living organisms only. Non-living organisms do not have cellular organization. Okay, first cell, then tissue system, organ system, then finally it will give rise to living organism. Though it looks simple, but it is not as so. There is a complex things in there. So these are the basic things only. So we will discuss in details in later chapter. Okay, so these are the characteristics of living organism. growth, reproduction, response to stimuli or consciousness, metabolism, and cellular organization. There are many more characteristics I can give you, but no need. So I'll give you these 5 important characteristics. What you need to remember is, you need to remember that only growth and reproduction are not the defining properties of living organism. Why? Because in case of growth, there is an exception. Where we find exception? In mountain. In rocks also we find exception. What happened in mountain? Mountain also saw growth, but in such growth is known as extrinsic growth. That means the growth takes place due to accumulation of other substance outside their body. Accumulation means like to grow something outside their body, to accumulate, to achieve something. For example, like trees, plants, small grasses, etc. That's why we do not say it is a defining properties. Next is reproduction. It is also not a defining properties of living organism, not a defining properties of living organism. Why? Because there is an exception, where in a sterile couple we find exception, and mule animal we find exception, and rest of the characters are all defining properties of living organism. Okay, so only those organisms which shows all those characteristics can be considered as living organism, but there is an exception in 2 characters, where in growth and reproduction. So remember, okay, so this is the characteristic of living organism. So next we will see certain rules that put forward by organization in order to write any scientific name. Okay, we will see this in next video.